All right. Welcome again, everybody, to the Fort Collins Internet Professionals Meetup. Tonight's topic is charting a course to web accessibility. Our speakers are Ron Zasadzinski and Graden Sikes. If you both want to introduce yourself and then get started.
So I'm Ron Zasadzinski, CEO and founder of CodeGeek, and I'll let Graden introduce himself as well.
My name is Graden Sikes. I'm a project manager at CodeGeek. I'm also kind of our accessibility champion.
So we're going to have a change right off the bat. So I've done a pilot for a little over 30 years, and as I was preparing this presentation, I realized that aviation lingo kind of fits what we're talking about tonight for context. So we're now calling this charting a course to web accessibility. And as we get started, I'll say a little bit, just a couple of words about CodeGeek. So we build websites, we design websites and build websites and web apps for companies that have reached both locally as well as nationally and globally. And we like working with clients who are looking forward to keeping their website up to date with future advancements and also appreciate us being an extension of their team. So our team of 12 works with clients all over the country doing those things. And we've been working on accessibility for about 6 years now. And we've been sponsors of WordPress Accessibility Day since it was founded about 4 years ago. And that's obviously what we're talking about tonight. So what sparked me to start creating this presentation and for Graden and I to work on this together is I really wanted to put together material that I wish all of our clients knew. And of course, many of you here are developers, designers, and other web professionals. And so if you're into accessibility, you'll probably know a lot of what we're talking about. But I hope that the context in which we're describing things helps create a mental model. That's really what we're after today. So if we're successful today, you'll have a good mental model in just an hour or so of what web accessibility entails. It's a giant subject, and so that's what we're after. So as we taxi for takeoff, I want to start by saying that web accessibility is first and foremost an ongoing process, and that should become more evident as we move through the presentation. There's many excellent ways to think about web accessibility, and it's good to look at things from different angles and different perspectives. So the perspective I want to share tonight about how to think about web accessibility and answer the question, many of you probably know an answer to this, because again, there's many answers to this. But I'd like you to think about the devices and the browsers you use to use the World Wide Web. So think about the laptop you use, whether it's a PC or a Mac or something else, the browsers that you use on that device, and then think about your phone. You might have an Android phone, you might have an iPhone. Think about the browsers you use on your phone, maybe you use more than one. So for sure, you want the web to work on all those devices and browsers that you're using. And of course, you know that there are other people using different devices and browsers, right? And as a web development company, we want the web to work for all of those devices. So we test for all of that, of course. That's part of it. And then input devices. There's quite a range of input devices as well. So on your phone, you're using your screen and probably your thumbs. And if you're using your desktop computer, you're probably using a monitor and a keyboard and a mouse. That's probably common for most of us. But there's lots of other ways and lots of other interface devices to use to interact with the web. So for example, maybe you're not able to use a mouse right now because you've had an injury in your arm, you're right-handed, your arm's in a sling for 6 weeks. And rather than figure out how to mouse with your left, you might just enjoy using the keyboard. And if accessibility is done right, you can actually do everything on a website you can do with the mouse and a keyboard with just the keyboard. Some people can't use mice for other reasons too. Maybe you have a relative that has Parkinson's or something like that, where they're not able to use a pointing device. So a keyboard might be the best interface for them, or something entirely different. If you have low vision, having a screen with very high contrast, a website that's utilizing high contrast could be very useful. And if you're blind, blind people can access everything on the internet as well, they use software called screen reader software, which Graden is going to demonstrate a little later. And that allows them to have the website read to them and interacting with the keyboard. And one of the really neat things is using this technology of screen reader software, you can interact with the website in ways that we don't have access to. And you can navigate it in some pretty innovative ways. So Graden's gonna, as he goes through his demo, you'll pick up on some of that. I'm just curious off the bat here, how many people have heard a screen reader test out loud? Okay, about good enough. Okay. So we want to make the web usable for people utilizing different technologies other than the ones you use, right? Not just these. We talked about these different factors that we want to account for. So the key to me is that one of the keys, again, of this perspective I'm sharing tonight, is that people are navigating your website right now while we're talking, using all of those technologies and methods. So can they do everything they want to do on your website? And can they do everything you want them to do on your website? So our goal is to build websites for all. All right, time for takeoff. So let's figure out how to build a new website and what's involved. So we've got, during our presentation tonight, there's 2 sections of what I call 3 key areas. This is the first of them. And so the 3 main areas of the project are going to involve design, development, so the HTML that gets output to the browser, also CSS and JavaScript, and content. Content is content creation, content entry, content maintenance over time. So I think this is very helpful to the mental model because then you know which teammates are involved at which parts of the process. So what are the things we're actually going to do to make the website accessible? So just like aviation, there are guidelines and standards. And in this case, the standards are what we affectionately call WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So these were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, known as W3C, and they are used worldwide. And there's 3 levels of guidelines, A, AA, and AAA, and they get more complex at the higher, more letters, more complex. And they're additive, so to meet AA, you also need to meet level A. AA is the current standard in practice. So if you're trying to build a website or a web app or phone app or anything like that to be accessible, the AA level is what you're targeting. WCAG 2.2 just came out 2 months ago today. And within WCAG 2.2, there are now 55 success criteria to meet the AA guidelines. So that's about 5 more than there used to be previously. So that's more than 2 times there are letters in the alphabet. So that's got to be a lot. There are 86 guidelines that are going for AAA, but that's unlikely that not too many people have to shoot for a AAA. So I'm going to mention WCAG 2.0 and 2.1 because there are certain laws that point to specifically these older guidelines. So for example, Section 508 compliance, which has to do with federally funded websites, or federal agencies, they need to be 508 compliant. That law specifically points to WCAG 2.0. There are others that point at WCAG 2.1, which makes sense. It's going to be that way for a while, right? Since 2.2 just came out. But they developed 2.2 specifically so that if you met the 2.2 guidelines, you are also 2.1 and 2.0 conformant. So that's useful to know. You can just stick with 2.2 and then it will work for everything. So we're going to be talking about AA, and the 55 guidelines for AA are organized into 4 principles. It's a nice acronym for that. And this acronym of perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust are helpful for helping you understand what that grouping of guidelines is trying to improve. All right, we reached cruise altitude, so let's get into some details. So as you're working through the guidelines and trying to learn them or reference them, I find this to be a great resource. It's the WCAG quick reference. And so some features of this I can point out are on the left-hand side, you can pick which WCAG version you want to be displayed. And then at the bottom left here, the current view, you can check the boxes for, or uncheck boxes for say AAA, because maybe you're only interested in single A and double A. And that filters the list for you a bit, which is good. And as we want more details about a particular guideline, so we're just focusing on one guideline here. The summary here might jog your memory as to what needs to be done. So this one is use of color. And color is not used as the only visual means of conveying information or indicating an action, prompting a response, or distinguishing a visible visual element. If you want to learn all the details about that, clicking on the understanding button on the right here will give you a full page of everything you want to know. And then the button down here of show techniques and failures is also very helpful, because that will give you specific things to do and also specific failures to avoid. And so we're going to look at a few specific examples in each of these areas of design development and content, just to give you a feel. We're obviously not going to go through all 55 of them, but we'll touch on just a few that are very common that you'll certainly need to address. So use of color. So this was the one we just looked at a moment ago. So not using just color to indicate conveying information. For example, links. The most common way to indicate a link is color plus an underline, right? So that's a very common way, and that does meet that guideline. So here's a list of text, and we have a link in the middle, and that one has. There are other ways. You don't have to use an underline. You could do other things that distinguish that. But that's the most common. Contrast. So for contrast, we need a visual presentation of text and images, images of text rather, have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1. And this is text dependent on the text size. So that's for any text. And for large text, it only has to be 3 to 1, which does help you out sometimes. So here's two examples of a banner on our website. And we've got a dark background here, and we can this fully meets the contrast requirement, 4.5 to 1. So even this greenish link on the black background, dark background, meets that contrast requirement. This one, however, you can easily see with your eye that the green link against that blue background is not as much contrast. In fact, that fails the limit. Interestingly, even though we can see the white on the blue very clearly, that doesn't pass. It's just shy of meeting the requirement. Now, if we increase the font size, then we would meet the 3 to 1 requirement, and it would be all right. So it's a good example of you can't just rely on your eyeballs to tell you if you're meeting the guidance. So what do you do? So there are some tools that we like to use. By the way, all the links that we're talking about tonight, we put together a Google Doc that has all of these resources on it. And we made a tiny URL to it. So it's tinyurl.com/A11Y help 2023. And this is a good thing to know in accessibility is the abbreviation A11Y stands for accessibility. And that's the abbreviation because there's 11 letters between the A and the Y. That's a quicker way to write it out. So you may see that other places. So again, A11Y help 2023. And we've got that link at the end as well. So for the color contrast checkers, the ones that we use the most are WebAIM, Colorable. Those two compare two text colors to each other to see if they meet the guideline. And if you're trying to scan a whole page, then the Chrome Color Contrast Analyzer is what we use. Plenty of tools out there, so you may have other favorites. All right, moving into development section. So bypassing blocks. So this is one you'll need to address on every website. So you need to provide a mechanism to bypass blocks of content that are repeated on multiple web pages. So the most common instance of that's going to be a main navigation, right? That occurs at the top of every page in most websites. And if someone is using a screen reader, they don't want to listen to that being read every single time they go to a new page and having to go through all of those top level links. Same if you're using just a keyboard. You don't want to have to tab through all of those links. So when you implement the mechanism to bypass the blocks, the most common way is a skip to main content hidden button. If you start with your cursor in the address bar, click the tab key to start advancing through the interactable elements on the page. one of the first things that should appear if you've done your programming right is the skip to main content box. And then when you hit the enter key, it will change the focus. It'll move the focus to the beginning of the main content. It's probably an H1 or something like that on the page. They're like bypassing the navigation. I'll mention one thing briefly here. So we work a lot in WordPress. Maybe some of you do too. And with the newer versions of WordPress, if you're using a theme that uses full site editing, this is actually native to it, and you can use the built-in functionality. Working with something older or not using full site editing, then you may need to create that for yourself. Okay, focus visible. So as we continue to tab through the web page, we need to indicate visually where the focus is right now, what interactable element has to focus. So a common thing is to put some kind of a colored box around it. Or all right, now a couple from the content world. So in content, the heading sequence is important. Several guidelines that point to this. And you may know this from SEO as well, that on a given page, you want to move through the heading levels in sequence. So H1, and then if there's sub-content, that should be an H2. And then if there's sub-content, that should be an H3. You don't want to skip an H3 and go right to an H4. The guidelines that say that you should do that. All right, so how do we know that we're doing these 55 guidelines correctly? So like 3 of our flight here is cross-check. We're going to check our work. And Graden is going to give us a demo in just a moment. Some accessibility testing on a page. We're going to use our fancy gear and test things out. So this is the second group of 3. There's 3 key testing techniques, and we need to do all of them in order to find all the accessibility errors and correct them. So automated tools, keyboard navigation testing, and screen reader software. And on the automated tools, what you're going to get back, well, maybe I'll first say, these are nice to use because they're easy to use. But depending on who you talk to, we will only find 30 to 40% of all the accessibility errors out there. So you still need to do the other 2 types of testing to pick up the rest. So it's a partial solution to the automated tools. So the automated tools will return usually at least 2 things: errors, which are typically look-like violations, and warnings. So some warnings are things that do not have to be fixed in WCAG. They just would improve usability if you fix those, but you don't necessarily have to. But some warnings call attention to an element that the automated tool cannot tell for sure that it meets the guidelines, so you have to check. So a good example would be video or audio content. So an automated checker will say, hey, there's video content on this page, and then you have to go check and see if it has captions, it has a transcript. It can't tell that for every video. Not every automated checker can do that. So just because they're warnings, you can't necessarily dismiss them outright. All right, well, give us a minute while we switch places here and switch what we're sharing.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for joining today and for being interested in accessibility. I'm going to be walking us through some testing procedures. As I mentioned at the start, I'm a project manager at CodeGeek, but I'm also an accessibility kind of champion for our team. I've been pretty part of this for the last year and a half. So we're going to do a bit of a auditing speed run here. Just going to walk you through on a single page on our staging website, CodeGeek. What I would do if I were to look at this page and try to report some issues. What we're looking at here at the bottom of our page editor is the accessibility checker plugin widget, which, as I'm saying, is really easy to use and explains things in plain English in most cases. So what we're seeing here is sort of the summary panel. We see that we've got 15 errors and 10 different warnings, passing 83 of the tests that the plugin is checking for. So what we're shooting for with this is that we want green across the board here and as many pass tests as possible. In the details panel, we get a list of all of the warnings, or excuse me, errors in red and warnings in yellow that we should try to address on the page in order to make things as accessible as possible. We hit this drop down here, we can see the affected code, the asset that's providing the issue, as well as a couple different actions that we can take, either to ignore the issue if we've deemed it appropriate to do so, or we can also view issues on the page here, which I always like to have this back-end view that's the list of all of these, as well as the front-end view, because the front-end view of the accessibility checker provides kind of an annotated and very obviously highlighted view of all the errors on the page. So as we can see here from looking through the accessibility checker plugin, we've got 13 instances of empty links. So with this error is related to links on the page that don't have any text within the link. So it's essentially saying that someone with a screen reader will come across an element that calls out a link, but there's no text to tell them what that link is actually going to do. So we need to kind of determine something. So you can see that there are a handful of images on the page, as well as our footer icons that are contributing to these problems here. So if we were to look at these on the front end, you can see that we've got this map icon up at the top is flagging this issue, as well as a handful of other decorative items. And so this is kind of a weird issue where these images are linked. And if we were to look at the browser and the destination, these are just linking to the asset within the WordPress media library. So this is just something that's kind of odd and not really helpful for any users. So we would want to address this before we publish it for anybody, someone with limited abilities to use those.
So how would you address it, Karen?
Yeah. So I think it's a good question for a developer, but we would just want to make sure that the link is removed from this particular element.
In WordPress, there's a way to set those links to none. So they, instead of linking to their attachment page or somewhere else, they go nowhere.
Yeah, so, and just a note about auditing. So I'm a project manager. I don't have a whole lot of technical experience. I've learned a lot since I came on with CodeGeek. But as the auditor, it's sort of my responsibility to figure out what's going on the page and report to the best of my ability what is going wrong, and then I consult with our developers to figure out the best way to fix it. So I might not always have the best answer of exactly how to modify the code, but I know what's wrong.
With accessibility checker, it gives you a pretty good description, a clue of what to do on that front end blue box there.
Yeah, so on the front end here, if you click on the full documentation, for every error that the plugin tests, they have a pretty extensive page that explains what the error is, why it's being flagged, and how.
Do the developers have access to this tool as well?
Yeah, if they have access to the back end of the WordPress website, they should take a look. And all in my audits, I frequently copy and paste the links to the specific errors that they can get to it and read more. Or I'll even share this full documentation. So we've got a handful of those that I would report and let people know, or let our developers know that we need to fix those links. These links in our footer, so these are images, but they're going to our social media. And it wouldn't make sense for us to put actual text in alongside of these images. In some cases it might, but for a screen reader, we're looking for this alt tag. This is the text that will get read out loud to the screen reader to let people know, what the image looks like, or if that image is wrapped in a link, that also announces where the link is ideally going to. So since all of these icons have an alt text, it would be appropriate to ignore all of these issues. All of these empty links. So scrolling down on the page, incorrect heading order. So we're seeing here, there's an H4 that's being flagged. And that we're somehow breaking that proper sequence of headings. So if I was to take a look, this is the auditing and remediation H4. Scroll through the page here. So auditing and remediation here. So there's an H4 here. And if I were to inspect this heading above it, this, what's included in each map is an H2. So we are indeed skipping that H3, which is incorrect. And to solve by just changing these headings to an H3 instead of but something to note here is that if we're changing the structure of one heading, if there's similar content, which there is below here, heading one-on-one strategy calls, this is also an H4. So we would be going from H2 to an H3, then to an H4 that should be hierarchically on the same level. So we would want to make sure that we're going through all of our content and changing all of the heading levels as to resolve this issue.
And that possibly ask the
Yeah.
questions or concern. So how often do you get the false negatives, or I guess you could say, of this image has all text, so it doesn't really show up on it? How often does that happen?
I maybe say like 20% of the time. 20% of the time you get like a true, well, I don't know, maybe 10% of the time you get a true false positive. There's no action. But maybe another 30% of the time you need to really inspect. That's an issue. It's correct, or it's really interesting what's going on. So that's kind of why we're promoting the idea of using automated tools along with manual tools, because the more tests that you run, the more confidence.
Yeah, and I have a second question. All right. So for a landing page, it might make sense to go from an H2 and H4. For an article that you're reading, and maybe using a screen reader for that, you'd want to clearly go in that hierarchy. Is there any flexibility in the accessibility standards for that?
So when you're saying that it might be necessary to jump, are you talking from like the actual markup, or is it more from like a visual style of that?
Yeah, so having room for style really is appeal for the visual piece.
Maybe Ron, you can speak a little bit more to the technical side of this, but the answer is yes and no.
We're actually going to address that in another slide on the visual side. So we'll answer very shortly.
Great. Yeah, so then taking a look at the next error on this page, so we've got an iframe missing title. So this is calling out the fact that there is content that's embedded from another website through an iframe on the page, and there's no title associated with it. So someone who's using a screen reader might be coming across this content and be forced into this embedded element, and they might want to be able to skip that content. And so we need to provide a title before they enter in to determine whether or not they want to skip that content. Lucky for us, though, in this case, this is a Google Tag Manager iframe. So this is hidden content. You can tell that because there's an ARIA hidden equals true. And there's also a visibility hidden tag in all of these. So what both of these are telling us is, or all of these facts are telling us, is that we're using Google Tag Manager to add a tracking pixel on the page. It's hidden from anyone who's cited. It's also hidden from screen readers because of this ARIA hidden tag. So nobody's going to see this content. It's not providing anything meaningful to the actual front end user. So this is another instance where we could ignore this issue. Yeah. And then, yeah, as Ron was talking about, we've got a handful of other warnings here. In a similar fashion, we worked through a whole bunch of these just to see what ways we could improve our website and the overall usability. So there's things like this ARIA hidden is an instance where the plugin is calling out the fact that we've put an ARIA hidden label on an element on the page, and it's asking us if we really want to do that. Because adding an ARIA hidden tag to specific elements hides them from screen readers. Now you might want that, but you also want that hidden from people on the front end. If this is truly not something that anybody needs to see, but if there's an important image or text on your page that sighted users could see, then non-sighted users should also see that. So this is basically just validation. Do you really want to do this? If so, go ahead and ignore it. If not, you should remove that.
And in the basic, what's the strategy for those images?
Yeah, so in this case, we have on our website a bunch of page loader images. Just kind of fun graphics that show up. They don't really add anything meaningful to the page. So we've set them to ARIA hidden because if someone was using the screen reader and we didn't have ARIA hidden on there, every time we changed the page, the screen reader would announce, hey, there's this Randall White anim about, this random image that they have no idea what it is. It would be disruptive to their workflow. So we put ARIA hidden on here. And if I was actually auditing this page, I would ignore all of these and give a description of why. Other content errors that we run into a lot are related to alt text. So alt text, as we've already talked about, is really important for allowing people who use a screen reader to get the important context that images provide on a web page, even if they can't see it. So you need to add a description to meaningful images. Decorative images are supposed to have alt tag that is alt equals and then two quotation marks with nothing in the middle. That's an empty alt tag for decorative images. So we see that this is our little CodeGeek logo. If I were to scan the site and try to find this, let's see. This is here at the base of our footer. This is purely decorative. So the fact that we're calling out alt equals nothing is appropriate here. The screen reader wouldn't pick up that image because it's decorative, which is appropriate. I would ignore this issue. Link opens in a new tab or a window. That's sort of a rabbit hole that we're not going to get into tonight, so I'm going to skip that one. But then there's also this warning about potential content that the automated tool isn't able to fully test. So a video is present somewhere on the page. This is an interesting example of sort of a false positive in the case that this is calling out that there's some sort of video on the page. We need to make sure it's accessible or not. But when we look at this, this is just our YouTube channel icon. So for some reason, not sure why, maybe it's the fact that YouTube is in the alt text or in the link. The plugin is thinking that this is a video when it's not. So this would be the case. That's the accessibility checker plugin. And that's the first automated tool that we typically use here. If I were doing a real audit of this page, I would do another automated tool. I would use Wave by WebAIM. So this is a free-to-use in-browser testing tool. It allows you to scan a page at a time, and similar to what we were seeing with the accessibility checker plugin, it provides an annotated view over here on the right-hand side of the page, as well as a summary of all the issues that it finds on the page. And then there's also a little code tab, which is kind of nice for skimming through and finding snippets of code that are in error. So as we get into Wave here, we see that there are 8 alerts. We've got a skipped heading level. If I were to click on this button, it takes us to that auditing and remediation H4, which we already discussed. So that's one of the benefits here of using multiple tools, is that you can get confirmation from potentially questionable results in another tool. That's sort of the pro side of things. The con side of things, you might have noticed there are no warnings, no complete violations being reported here. So Wave doesn't see anything on this page as in violation. So it's important to use multiple tools because not all of them will catch all the issues that you want to find. So we've got that skipped heading level. We have already marked that in our audit for developers or content editors to resolve. We've also got a couple of these warnings here for content that's being served through a plugin. So this is another one of those instances where the automated tool doesn't know what the plugin is serving. So it's just letting you know, okay, there's 6 things on this page that we can't tell. So you might want to check those out and make sure it's successful. If you were to click on those and kind of inspect the code here, we would see that this is related to those page wipe animations or images that we have. So we've already talked about those as well. So we would definitely want to take a close look, but it needs to be no script element warning here, which again is that Google tag feature. There's a no script, which is generally something that you want to just take a look at and make sure that this is. So we've already identified all these things with other tests, so we would move on then to manual testing, keyword testing. So for keyboard testing, the concept here is that we're basically just navigating through all of the interactable elements on a page and just making sure that we actually work the way that we want. We're in the handout that we've provided, or the link that we've provided, there's a breakdown of all of the expected keyboard shortcuts that should be used during keyboard testing, but for the sake of this page, using the tab key to advance to the next element, holding shift and hitting tab will take you to previous, and then the return key or spacebar will activate elements. So with that in mind, we're just testing to see what interactable elements work here. So I'm going to click browser bar, tab it through. As Ron talked about, that skip to main content button showed up here, which is awesome. If I were to hit the return key just as a keyboard navigator, it doesn't appear on the surface that anything has worked, but if I hit tab again, we have skipped that main navigation, which is what we were after. Going back through to that skip to main content button, tabbing that logo takes us to the home page. We definitely want that to full focus. All of our links in the main navigation are working. Services is a drop-down menu, so I'll hit the return key to open that up. And then tabbing through now gives me the option to go to those sub options. The return key again on services closes it and advances to the next at the very top of.
And I just point out that hitting the tab allows you to navigate from one interactive element to the next, skipping all content in between that's not interactive. And that's why you end up going from one link to the next link to the next and skip each one.
Yeah, essentially keyboard navigation is just using those interactive elements. So links, buttons, custom interactive. So as we advance to the page, we've already talked about how there's these weird images that are linked, so we'll take care of that. through here, there are no links or buttons in any of these content sections. So typically, if everything's working correctly and we got rid of the links on these images, we can skip to this WordPress accessibility day link, which is properly pulling focus. You can see from the border outline that we have around there. That's indicating the focus on the screen. Contact button and the various links. Yeah, so looking at purely just the keyboard navigation, everything seems to be working okay. Screen reader testing. So we have Windows running here. I'm going to be running NVDA, which is the most common and free screen reader software available. On Windows, there's also paid, and then for Mac, there's Mac OS.
Welcome to NVDA. OK button press. Monthly accessibility plans. Monthly accessibility plans, map.
Leave it alone here so that I can talk you through what we're about to do, because it can be pretty overwhelming the first time you hear it. Bear with me for just 1 second. I'm going to pull up one tool that NVDA offers that I can still
Monthly can help tool submenu speech. Monthly accessibility plans, map, CodeGeek document, link graphic.
Okay, so what we've got here in NVDA in the bottom left is the speech viewer. So as a sighted user, I find this really helpful while I'm auditing, because it gives me a visual readout of the text that the screen reader is calling out. So as I'm working through this, if listening to it is a little overwhelming or weird, we can read the bottom line in that speech viewer, and it can kind of give you a visual cue of what we're currently focused on using the screen reader. So just like with keyboard navigation, I'm going to start in the browser, and I'm going to just slowly work my way through here, through different elements and different navigation methods that some screen reader might use. So screen reader testing is all about providing context and making sure that the context of your website is working properly. So just like how some users on your website might navigate the page and read every single word and look at every single image, you can certainly do that with the screen reader, but there are also other ways of navigating that make it so that essentially skimming with the screen reader. So what we're going to look at here, I'll show you a little bit of what it looks like to go content piece by content piece as if you were reading the whole thing, but then some other primary ways for navigating through all of the headings. That's why it's really important to get your heading ordered correctly, because people will skim by reading all of the different headings and determining whether or not their relevant content is within or will be beneath that heading. We'll navigate through the links to make sure that the links are going to the right place, and we'll also take a look at different landmarks.
Toolbar. Bookmark this month. Skip to main content link.
So we hear that that skip to main content link was the first thing that was announced by page content. If we test that with the return key,
I don't think I shared the audio on the recording on the Zoom. Let me just redo that.
okay. So we've got that link. It's a skip to main content. So if we hit return, what we're expecting is that that would jump to our H1 and just start reading the page from which we bypass the navigation.
Main landmark monthly accessibility plans, map, heading level 1.
And then if I were using the up and down arrow keys to navigate to the next element on the page, so hitting down will take us to the subheading.
Chart a path forward so that your website is as accessible as possible for everyone. Link graphic CodeGeek's mascot, Randall, navigating a map with a compass in hand.
So you can hear what that alt text, how that alt text provides context of what that image is.
Heading level 2, a superior web accessibility solution.
Yeah, so I would start my audit by going through using the arrow keys, taking a look at every single piece of content on the page just to make sure nothing's missed, to make it in order properly. And just to make sure that I get sort of the full context of the page. But then after that, I would go through and I would test all of the headings. So to navigate through the headings is using the H key to go to the next heading, holding Shift and pressing H to go to the previous heading. So we're currently on an H2. If I hit the H key, it should take us to the next heading within the order of the page.
Accessibility plans to meet your needs heading level 2.
H2.
What's included in each map? Heading level 2.
Okay, so then we've jumped to a section that we wanted to explore further. So then using the arrow keys.
Separator. Link graphic wrench inside of a gear icon.
We've got that graphic.
Heading level 4 auditing and remediation.
More headings, and then you could, you kind of get a sense of how someone might use that by going through the headings and finding the content. Once I finish going through all, in the back.
All those manual tests, are you able to automate them so that they're repeatable, so you don't have to remember how to do each of these tests?
If there was a way, I haven't figured it out.
That's a real roadblock, is not, you do it and then you said, you tell the developer they've got a problem, they can't reproduce. So you've got a communication gap between you and the developer. Because they may or may not be able to replicate what you're doing.
Oftentimes, what they do is grab a video screen, screen capture what they're doing, along with the voiceover, so that we can hear it and see it, and see what the user is experiencing. And they include that with their report.
Okay. Yeah, a screen capture is great. And just detailed notes. If there was an error that I found here, I would explain. For instance, we've skipped the main heading level here. I would explain what's included in each map is an H2. Auditing and remediation is an H3. Using the screen reader, that kind of confuses the general order. Let's change auditing and remediation to an H3 rather than H4. It is a lot of manual note-taking, detailed explanation, and working closely with your developer to really work through that issue. So
developers also have to get comfortable using the screen reader tools so that when they get a report and make a change, they can also test it, make sure that it's now meeting the requirements before it's in that.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, and that was sort of part of the purpose why we put on this presentation, is to help you feel empowered to at least get started and try to use the screen reader. Because the more you do it, the easier it gets. So yeah, I just finished headings. I would do the same thing using links. And then I would also go through and do the exact same thing with content landmarks. So the navigation, main content section, for any other custom content sections that we put. It's also worth noting in the document that we provided, there are links that provide keyboard shortcuts for these common screen readers, so that we can take a step about testing these things yourself.
I want to mention something. So if you guys have ever heard of Playwright is a front-end testing framework. They do have some accessibility testing tools there. So I discovered the hard way that our admin menu links were horrible. They were like spans inside of divs instead of actual links. And so I couldn't actually do end-to-end testing with it. So as I thought they might have accessibility testing, it looks like they did. No, this is just like 2 seconds of research, but there might be some overlap where it could be other.
Let's see, is there anything else I can talk about? Not particularly. I know that's a lot. It does get easier the more you do it, so I just encourage you all to try.
NVX and O.
Yeah, question.
So after you've done all that testing, what's the outcome then? Do you provide a report to the client?
Yeah,
And what's that process?
Ron's got a slide on that, which we'll talk about here.
Summarizing just a few things that Graden mentioned with some specific tools for you. So on the automated tools, like he mentioned the accessibility checker plugin by Equalize Digital. So that's WordPress only, but we really like it. The free version works, everything you saw works on a single page. The paid version provides even more things like site-wide reports, which is maybe one of the best features of it. There's some other benefits to the paid version as well. One of which is Amber Hines, who she and her husband Chris run the company. Some of you may know them. They used to live here in Fort Collins, and they since moved to Austin, Texas, and started this company. But it is actually a Fort Collins original based company. And they do, Amber does twice a month, a 1 hour open office hour session that costs you nothing if you're a subscriber to it. And I think it's about 140 a year for one site. So just for the question and answer time with Amber, it's worth it for that. Wave, as Grady mentioned, is one page at a time. And the other tool we use is Power Mapper because it tests all the pages of any website in one go. So it doesn't have, it's not WordPress, it can still test that. That is a paid tool, $50 a month. But it does other things as well, in addition to accessibility. We use it for many things. And then on screen reader testing, as Graden was mentioning on the PC, NVDA and JAWS have almost complete market share between the two of them. And on Mac OS and Mac OS and iOS, VoiceOver is built in, and on Android, TalkBack is built in. But those are a little more difficult to use and really not as common. So our understanding is that the standard for screen reader testing is to use NVDA or JAWS. All right, beginning our initial descent. So let's start talking about a few of the lessons we've learned on our journey navigating these skies of accessibility. So some tips that we've learned along the way. So in the design phase, start planning for accessibility right from the beginning. So in discovery and design, be thinking about it and planning it in. One of the best things you can have your designer do is talk to developers as soon as they have their first layout before you show it to the client. So there are things that are easy to design, that are very useful and usable, but impossible to make accessible or very difficult. So it's nice to find that out in the design phase before you've shared it with the client and they get all excited about this thing that now you're going to have to not do. And several slides for development phase tips. So that's kind of, you've got the feel here. Test as you go. Developers, you can do keyboard testing constantly, continuously while you're developing. And that builds your comfort level quickly as to what to expect to interact with different elements. Also, if this is new to you, you're going to be unsure if you're doing it right. So doing this early and often does build your knowledge quickly, which is helpful. And as a developer, you're most familiar with the code you're writing while you're writing it, not a week later. So if you can address those accessibility issues as you're building the component yourself, it actually saves you a lot of time. So you don't have to go back to it and then remember, what was I doing when I wrote that code to find a little detail that wasn't quite right. Big tip is use semantic HTML right from the start and everywhere possible. So that puts you on the best accessibility footing by default. So one of the reasons is every HTML element has a default ARIA role assigned. And as an example, the examples here, so buttons, their role is button. A link, anchor tag, has the role of link. And if you use standard HTML elements like these here, then the keyboard behaviors are already built in. You don't have to do anything. They will behave the way keyboard users expect those elements to behave. Screen readers will read them and interact with them the way screen readers do. Like you were mentioning, Tim, that there were links, but they weren't marked up correctly. They were marked up as spans within divs, and there was no A tag anywhere. So then the keyboard and screen readers can't interact with those elements properly. So that's the best thing to do is use semantic HTML from the start. And then div tags, you want to use as few of those as possible generally. Those have no ARIA role assigned, it's a role of none. So if you're using a div tag for something, you may need to add an ARIA label to indicate its purpose so that, again, keyboards know how to interact with it, what should happen when the person's with this enter key in the space bar. Or an arrow or down. And in that reference document, the Google Doc that we shared with you, there are a couple of references to ARIA resources that are really good. So we recommend checking those out. Yes, so on the focus indicator, one tip is you've got the outline around things. It's very helpful to have a 2-pixel outline offset to that focus indicator, because when you get to the outline being around, say, a dark image, then you can't see the focus indicator anymore because there's almost no contrast between it and the image. So with that little bit of offset, creates a little space. See it easily. And Graden already mentioned decorative images should have empty alt tags, and an empty alt tag syntax is alt equals 2 empty quotes. So don't just put alt and then nothing after it. That is not good. So save you some time, hopefully, by knowing these things in advance. And then this is useful to discuss links versus buttons. So there's behavior and markup for links and buttons versus their appearance. So there's two areas, at least 2 areas in the web where this is true, that what matters structurally is the markup and the behavior. And don't get thrown off by the appearance of the thing, which is what the client is going to focus on. So behavior, links take users to a new location. So either a new web page, or they scroll the page to another section of the existing page. That's all that links do. Buttons trigger some action, like playing a video, opening an accordion, opening a dropdown on a main navigation item. So that's what buttons do. So very distinct functions. And we're marking them up, right? Links, when we're going to use an A tag, buttons, use the HTML button element. Or if you're using an anchor tag to define the thing, you can set an ARIA role of a button for it. Yes.
So we use buttons for the call to action to go to checkout, for example,
Yes.
and to submit when you are ready to buy.
Yes.
Those are 2 different functions of buttons. Is it okay to continue to use the button, but you just need to mark it up differently, or is that what you're saying?
So it should be marked up as a button if it's taking an action. It should be marked up as a link. Let's see, you said like a call to action, right?
Yeah, you go to
Right.
the website.
Right.
The checkout.
Here's a good example. So here's a page that has a couple of inline links, like text links, that are marked with the underline. Those are marked up as anchor tags. But what about this guy here? Explore custom websites. Okay, so that's like a call to action button, right? But this is marked up as a link because its behavior is it takes you to another page, or maybe it scrolls on the page. That's taking us somewhere else. So that gets marked up as a link, and then you use styling to make it look like a button. Right? So what matters is that markup is correct, so the behavior is correct. Then it passes all the screen reader tests, the screen readers are going to interact with it, keyboards can interact with it. So, the developer needs to worry about the markup, and those of us operating on the front end can call it a button, but it's actually a link.
So it's a call to a link, not a call to action.
There you go. Call to a link. All right, and then headings are the other area where the markup matters, but the appearance, you have more flexibility than you might think. So as we talked about with the sequence, a visual designer might be tempted to skip that H3 and use an H4 because it looks correct for that part of the page. There is absolutely nothing wrong in the fact that we generally encourage it, that you should create classes, the developer should create classes so you can make the H3 look like the H4 so that the designer can say, this needs to look different, can you make it do, and that way they don't skip the heading level. So that is a perfectly appropriate way to handle that situation. So don't use the visual appearance to pick the heading level. Right? It should be semantic for the heading level and class for the subject. Yes.
Maybe a slightly more technical question about this because I don't remember, but
From an SEO perspective, I know, there's like a document outline and an algorithm that reads through the HTML page 12 through 6, right? But as we were walking through on like voiceover software and stuff, does that semantic order have a bearing on what gets read next? So for example, H1 text, paragraph, paragraph, H2 text, paragraph, paragraph, H1 text, text, something like that. Or like H1, H4, H3, H2. As I navigate with a keyboard, does that mess up the keyboard navigation between these things as well, or will it just top two text heading?
So keyboards only navigate between interactive elements, so they're only going to go from link to link to link. Or anything that you can interact with, or an accordion, so better to close it. But the screen reader is what's going to interact with those heading levels.
Yes.
And you might be able to speak to this better than I can.
So it'll just go in order,
Like rendered order, right?
yeah, to the read order. So no matter what the, yeah, it'll go H1 to H2 to H1, all of that. The sequence order is what I'm looking for. But it will call out what kind of heading each heading is. It'll say this is a heading level 1, this is a heading level 2. It won't skip depending on different things.
All right. Cleared for the approach to the airport. Aren't we there yet? So this is the fun part, because now we have to get comfortable with uncertainty. So how do we know we've arrived? How do we know we've done it? We know we can't check off a box. So what does it mean to be conformant with a website? So it's more complex than just say arriving at a street address, right? You know when you arrive here at the Innosphere, follow your Google map, and there's the parking lot, there's the door, you're here. There's no question, you check the box. But if you go visit a city, you visit San Francisco, that's a little more complicated, right? If you're going to be there for a few days and visit some things, and the museum is closed on Mondays, so you need to adjust your plan. Maybe the weather is preventing you from going to the park, so you need to adjust the plan. And then even when you're done and you go home and you say, hey, we visited San Francisco, have you checked off the box? Well, there's probably more to do in San Francisco, right? So web accessibility is more like that. So there are fuzzy parts to accessibility. Conformance is one of the biggest ones. And this is hard for many of us, right? Developers especially like to do things very precisely. We like to write code, we test it, it works, we've done it, awesome. Feels great. That's often why we got started as a developer, right? That's what I did.
But then your client edits the page.
Exactly. But accessibility doesn't work that way. You may have tested it and it works perfectly, but is it accessible? And then there's these gray areas, as you can see, as Graden was showing in various testing. So this is hard. So I encourage you to embrace the wisdom of uncertainty, because it helps a lot with web accessibility. And of course, many of us are this way, not just developers, that we want it to be done and checked off. So why is conformance fuzzy? So we covered errors versus warnings earlier, and it just takes training and experience to be able to interpret them correctly. But a conformance site will have errors. You just have to know which ones can be ignored because they actually are conformant. It's just like an automated tool is calling an error. There are errors that you can't resolve. For example, the false positives. Screen readers will, testing tools will mark those decorative images with empty alt text as an error, but they're not. That's the correct syntax to meet the guideline. You might have errors in the queue to be fixed, right? So at the time of website launch, you may not have everything fixed. Maybe you're 95% done, but you may have a few more things that you're going to address shortly after launch. And then there's errors that could be related to a feature the client insists on. That happens too. They're like, no, we really have to have the thing do this thing. And you're like, well, we cannot make that accessible that way. Like, well, we really want it and we understand that. So what we do before website launch or anytime we've done some kind of a landmark thing, a milestone in the process, is provide a web accessibility report. And it includes all the things in those 4 areas. We have the client sign off that they agree the website is substantially conformant. It's a fancy language. With level AA at this point in time, and they understand these are the things that are, these things are true, but substantially conformant. So that's the way to handle that. All right. key takeaways as we land the airplane. So a big one is accessibility benefits all of us. So in the real world, you go to a big airport like Denver International, and there are elevators. They need to be there for people that use wheelchairs. But if you have kids or a whole bunch of luggage, they're also very helpful to you. People movers. You know, your 90-year-old grandmother might need that to get to the end of common floor speed. For us, we probably use them too. It gets us there quicker. And curb cuts, all these things are things that benefit all of us, even though they may have been placed there for people with specific disabilities. So when it comes to the web, there are a lot of things that do benefit all of us. I'll just focus on one of them in the interest of time, but on video and audio captions and transcripts. So when my wife and I watch TV, we have the captions on frequently. It just helps, you know, understand what's going on. Comedy show, we turn them off, but if it's anything else, we keep them on. And transcripts are awesome. I listen to lots of podcasts, watch lots of videos, and you know, I often want to go back to a part or find that thing again. I'm trying to find it in the, you know, time-based media is difficult, but when transcripts there, I can search for that phrase. Love it. I do that all the time. So that's an example of I get so much benefit from that almost every day. It's awesome. So many benefits to everybody. All right, so here's kind of the mental model that I'm hoping we have created for you. So those are 2 areas of 3 keys. So we've got areas of effort, design, development, content, 3 key testing techniques. And then the big one is that accessibility is an ongoing process. Really, this is a feature. It's not a bug. And here's why. Content or accessibility is going to change over time on your website. As content gets edited, as a plugin or core software gets updates, accessibility can change. So we believe that the best practice is to do an ongoing process of a little bit of auditing and a little bit of remediation every month to get to the end. So we know that everything changes all the time in life, right? In the universe and websites. It's my favorite Douglas Adams book, Life, the Universe, and Websites. It's about how everything changes really fast. And, you know, look at the internet, right? How fast does that change? It's got to be the fastest rate of change of almost any system I can think of is the internet, other than maybe bacteria flying in the test tube in the lab or something. Yeah, high rate of change. So this is the way to do it. So we recommend that you encourage your clients to plan for a monthly budget to do this work. And accessibility benefits us all. So the joys and rewards are well worth it. I'll come back to this. This is that link again and how to get a hold of us. Thank you very much for your attention.